Good evening. As we continue on now in the Ein Yaakov, he does something a little bit strange, which he does in a number of places. I'm not sure why. Perhaps somebody listening is a little bit more familiar with the history of the Ein Yaakov and can explain this phenomenon. And that is that the last few shiurim have been on Shabbos Daf Lamed, on Tractate Shabbos, folio 30. But now, all of a sudden, the next couple of pieces in the Ein Yaakov don't follow the order of the Gemara. He kind of backtracks and goes back. The piece that we're going to see today is on folio 25b, and then we'll see a couple of pieces on folio 26, Daf Chaf Vav. And then finally one more on Daf Chaf Ches before the Ein Yaakov goes back to the regularly scheduled program. Why it was printed out of order, I don't know. I don't know if it's just some simple thing that as he was writing it, he did it out of order for some reason, or perhaps there was some cheshbon, some plan why he felt this was a more appropriate way to reorder the Gemara. And honestly, I don't know. However, Ksiv, the pasuk says it's a pasuk in Eicha, Lamentations, which is written after the Churban, after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Vatiznach mishalom nafshi, that my nefesh, my soul, is devoid of peace. What was lacking, therefore, after the Churban, after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash? Amar Rabbi Avohu, Zu hadlokas ner b'Shabbos, that refers to the lighting of Shabbos candles. Rav Kook explains that his point is that after the Churban, the Navi, the prophet, wasn't even able to find a moment of peace. At least beforehand, at the very least on Shabbos, he was able to have an island of peace in his life. But after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, even that island in time of Shabbos, to give him some time to have peace of mind, even that was lacking. Nashisi Tova, I have lost goodness. What's the good that he lost? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Zu Beis HaMerchatz. Rabbi Yirmiyah says that refers to a bathhouse. And again, Rav Kook points out that when a person is in a state where they no longer, either it means they no longer have the opportunity or they no longer have the incentive because they're so depressed and downtrodden to take care of their personal hygiene, that's a pretty bad state of affairs for a person to be in. Rabbi Yochanan says it's not referring to a bathhouse in particular, but rather zu rechitzas yadayim v'raglayim bechamin, that he was lamenting the fact that he doesn't have the ability to wash at the very least his hands and feet in hot water. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha amar zu mita noah v'kelim no'im she'aleha. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says that what was lacking was a nice bed with nice linen on the bed. And Rabbi Abba takes the bed theme one step further, and he says, Zu mita mutsaas, this is a bed which is made very nicely, v'isha mikushetes, and a woman who is adorned, l'talmid chacham, for a Torah scholar. Because we had begun to speak about Shabbos candles, and the Gemara says that for a Torah scholar, he should spend Friday night together with his wife. That's where Rabbi Abba said that the ultimate in the peace is after having the Shabbos candles is the bed made nicely and the beautifully adorned wife for the Torah scholar. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda said the name of Rav. Kach hoya minhago shel Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi. the following was the custom of Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi. In the Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi was a Tana, one of the sages of the Mishnah. There's a number of different Tanoim who are Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi is often referred to without also mentioning his father's name. Whenever the Mishnah just mentions Rabbi Yehuda without a father's name, it's referring to Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi. What was his custom? Erev Shabbos, on Friday afternoon, Mevi and Lo, they would bring for him a reva, a bowl, malea chamin, full of hot water, v'rochetz panav yadav v'raglav, and he would wash his face, his hands, and his feet. Umisatef v'yoshev b'sadinin hamitzuyatzim, and he would wrap himself up and sit in sheets that have tzitzis on them. They were sheets with four corners, and it was still daytime, so he was obligated in tzitzis. Vidome lemalach Hashem tzvakos, and he looked like an angel of Hashem. So first of all, by the way, keep in mind, just culturally, we have to remember that, nowadays, most of us are showering just about every single day. And therefore, washing oneself is not such a big deal for us nowadays. But you have to remember that, Queen Victoria's famous line about everybody should take a bath once a month, whether or not they need it. Historically, bathing was not a very common thing. So this idea of washing one's face, hands, and feet every Erev Shabbos prior to each Shabbos was, I'm not going to say it was necessarily radical, but it was definitely encouraging washing oneself more often than the average person did back in the good old days. And actually the halacha over here is that we learn from here that one should purposefully be bathing prior to Shabbos, preferably one's entire body. But if for whatever reason washing one's entire body is not an option, then at the very least one should make sure to be washing his hands, feet, and face. The Gemara had compared the appearance of Rebbe Yehuda after he got himself ready for Shabbos and wrapped himself up in his sheets that had tzitzis attached, that he looked like a Malach Hashem Tzvakos, like an angel of Hashem, the Lord of the hosts. So first of all, the Malach Gavriel is referred to as the Ish Lavush Habadim, the man who's wrapped up in tapestries. So therefore, this idea that Rabbi Yehuda dressed in that manner looked like a malach, looked like an angel, that's the connection. Also, the commentators point out that when a Torah scholar like Rabbi Yehuda dresses in a very refined and nice manner and has his face shining with the joy of Shabbos arriving, he actually looks really like an angel. Rav Kook points out on the idea of him washing his face and his hands and his feet is that the only parts of his body that Rabbi Yehuda had to cleanse were the most external parts of himself. But his entire life, he was so attached, not just on Shabbos, but the entire week long, to holiness, that there was no impurity, no uncleanliness on the entire rest of himself, except for the most external parts, his face with which he saw the world around him, his hands with which he interacted with the world around him, and his feet which took him places. And that Rabbi Yehuda was wearing a talis with tzitzis. because there's a halacha, a mitzvah in the Torah that we're not allowed to wear shatnez. Shatnez is mixtures of wool and linen. The exception to that is that if you have a garment of linen, the tzitzis are allowed to be made out of wool. And the kind of concept behind that is that when a person lifts himself up to the higher spiritual realms, then the person has succeeded in moving out of the dimension in which we live, in which there are distinctions. And living in a dimension where there's distinctions, in that same dimension, then you can talk about mixtures. But when we lift ourselves up to a higher spiritual plane of existence, and we come into contact with the oneness, then there's no division between things, and therefore there cannot be mixtures, and then certainly not any forbidden mixtures. So Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, sitting with the tzitzis wrapped around him, that symbolized his being above and beyond the world of division and the world of multiplicity. And that's why it refers to that he looked like a Malach Hashem Tzvakos. Tzva is an army. An army is a gathering of many different people, all joined together for one purpose. So in the same way as we were saying a moment ago, Rabbi Yehuda succeeded in getting out of that world of division into the world of complete and total unity. Tana Rabbanan, Ezehu Ashir. We learned in a brisa who is rich. Of course, there's a famous Mishnah in Perek of us about that, but the Gemara is going to give a different answer. Kol sheyeshlo nachas ruach ba'oshro. Divrei Rabbi Meir. The opinion of Rabbi Meir is that wealth means that you have nachas ruach, you have satisfaction in your wealth. So the Ben Yoyada explains, what does that mean, satisfaction in your wealth? And he says that some people can acquire a lot of wealth. They may even be happy with their wealth, but the efforts that they have to expend in order to acquire that wealth create a situation in which internally they are not at rest and they are not at peace with themselves. And they don't really feel internal joy from their efforts at accomplishing their financial goals. And in that case, the wealth is not really belonging to the person, but he's actually a slave to the wealth, because he's living a life which is causing him misery in order to achieve his financial goals. Real wealth is when a person is living a life in which the pursuit of wealth and the accomplishment of having that wealth is something that's bringing complete and total internal peace to him. The Gemara goes on, Rabbi Tarfon Omer. Rabbi Tarfon says, you want to know who's rich? Kol sheyeshlo kuf krumim, someone who has 100 vineyards, v'kuf sados, and 100 fields, v'kuf avodim she'ovdin behen, and 100 slaves who are working in them. Rabbi Akiva Omer, kol sheyeshlo isha na'a b'ma'aseha. Rabbi Akiva says wealth is someone who has a wife who conducts herself nicely. And finally, Rabbi Yossi Omer, kol sheyeshlo beis hakisei samach l'shulchano. Wealth is having a bathroom near your table. Got to keep in mind, back in the good old days, before there was indoor plumbing, people would have to go out to use the outhouse. Sometimes they would have to travel a long distance because you didn't necessarily want the outhouse right by your house. True wealth was somebody who got up in the middle of the night and had a beis hakisei samach l'shulchano he had an outhouse near his table. Have a very good evening. Thank you very much for listening.